Hello, my name is Kevin Podkowka, and welcome to the Savoy Mountain State Forest. I'm the management forester for the North Berkshire Management District, and it's my job to sustainably manage the forests under the responsibility of the Department of Conservation and Recreation for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I accomplished this task by following a robust framework of proven scientific and cultural practices with nearly 25 years of experience spanning 5 different states. And I've worked for both federal agencies and state agencies. In the book, The Unforeseen Wilderness, an essay on Kentucky's Red River Gorge, Wendell Berry wrote, "I'm speaking of the life of a man who knows that the world is not given by his fathers, but borrowed from his children. I will say that he is not alone in his sentiment, and that I, with the other land stewards of the Commonwealth, conduct our work with that mindset every day. By being here with me today, you've shown that you're interested in understanding the work that is being conducted to help leave this world better than we loaned our parents. With those words and philosophy in mind, let me introduce you to an important project that is being undertaken. The Savoy Landscape Scale Restoration Project is part of the Massachusetts Dynamic Forest Restoration Initiative, which is a coordinated public and private lands collaboration that enhances forest resiliency, restores fish and wildlife habitat diversity, mitigates invasive species, and creates a baseline model for long-term transboundary landscape level planning throughout the region. This project is also designed to reach out to rural, low-income communities. Currently, the forest structure of Massachusetts, and actually most of New England, is skewed to a much more mature forest than what we need, while lacking very old and very young forests. The reason for this is based on our land use history. About 80% of New England was cut over by the end of the 19th century, and what followed for the next 30 years was the abandonment of farms for work in factories or farming the more fertile areas of the Ohio River Valley. This resulted in most of New England reforesting at the same time. Added to this was the New Deal, enacted during the Great Depression, and this saw the creation of the Civilian Conservation Corps and large-scale reforestation efforts that were undertaken in areas identified as in need of supplemental planting. The key to achieving more very old forest on the landscape are to identify areas that are relatively free of exotic vegetation, have a broad range of native species present, and have healthy soils. Some other indication of forests with potential for staying healthy and vigorous through late development stages are the presence of large downed trees in the forest floor and large trees in the canopy. These areas can be managed to expand their footprint and have more representation on the landscape. The other habitat that is critically imperiled is young forest. The young forest ecosystem is disappearing across New England, and especially quick in Massachusetts. There are several factors contributing to its disappearance, such as less agriculture, less forestry, more effective fire suppression, less prescribed burning, better flood control, and suburban development. These, along with many other factors, contribute to a loss of diversity and complexity on the landscape. Unlike very old forest, young forest needs to be continually created because of how quickly these areas lose their young forest values. High native species diversity is important for climate change resilience and is best understood by looking at our own society. Much like different races, genders, national origins, or beliefs and backgrounds make our society stronger, the same applies in the natural world. More native species that occur in the landscape, populations large enough to sustain themselves, the more able the landscape becomes to resist the negative impacts of climate change. Again, similar to our own society, the collective strengths of these species make them much stronger than the sum of their parts. So, please join me as we explore the Savoy Mountain Landscape Resiliency Project and the landscape area scale restoration. It's been said that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and this is an excellent representation of how we are losing young forest and moving towards a less dynamic landscape. This is an area that had a young forest installed about 12 years ago. In the background, you can see that young forest trees are already very dense and that the site is maturing. In just this short amount of time, the wildlife now treat this area more like a mature forest than a young forest. There are certain species of birds that actually stop using it within the first 5 years because the young forest is, well, not young enough. It's important to realize that just because we think it's young doesn't make it so. As a matter of fact, Most things that we apply measurements to, like how old is this forest or how tall is this tree, are things that we do to try and better understand the natural world or determine if the needs of society are going to be met. But to the blue jay or chipmunk, it's just another area that either does or does not have the resources required to fulfill their individual needs at a fixed point in time. Young forests convert very quickly. Without nearly constant disturbance across the landscape, it is lost until the next major storm creates a gap large enough over forested area to start a new age class. Many times the storms that once created these holes in the forest now hit residential areas where they create problems for people. The other option that we have is to take the responsibility to install that young forest ourselves. Young forests not only provide critical habitat, but it also how the land ensures that there are younger trees that can take the place of older trees in the landscape. Older trees usually suffer damage or develop diseases that can kill them before they actually die of old age. The pool of trees that take their place in the crown start their journey into the canopy as part of young forest ecosystems. Before humans were present, large mammals such as mastodons and disturbances such as natural fires, floods, and storms helped to ensure that there was a balance of young and mature forests. Native Americans conducted activities such as prescribed burning for game and forage, along with forest clearings for crops and villages that mimicked the ancient disturbance regimes, and in many cases became critical for the survival of a number of habitats once large land mammals went extinct after the last ice age. Now, our society has changed flood patterns by damming rivers and removing beavers. Fires are put out as soon as possible, and storms that would have created openings in forests now occur over neighborhoods and parking lots. Since we have handicapped nature, it now falls upon us to support these processes. Mature forests are critical for several wildlife species to complete their life cycles. Though the diversity in mature forests is lower, there are numerous sensitive and in many cases threatened or endangered plant species that can only be found in mature forests. Orchids, for example. Very old forests are even more so, in that there are specific plant species, lichens, mosses, and fungi that can only exist in very high-functioning, very old forests. The other advantage that very old forests have is that they oftentimes are much more stable and generally suffer from fewer exotic problems. Mature forests, and very old forests for that matter, also produce the seeds that start young forests. The key here is diversity and complexity. The more the landscape has of many different things, the lesser the chance of going without. It's kind of like what a squirrel does getting ready for the winter. They store things like acorns, beech nuts, hickory nuts, all over the place, so that they have a lot of opportunities to find food, and that food has different nutrients to sustain them through the winter. They hide so much, in fact, that they don't even have to find it all to survive. If we want our forests to continue to be healthy and diverse, with the challenges presented by climate change, we need to take a lesson from the squirrels and have a lot of places with all different types of forests scattered all over the landscape. Carbon sequestration and storage are two very important and admittedly complicated concepts. Carbon storage is what's here in this very large tree. Carbon is stored in every cell of this tree, and if it's bound up in this tree, it's not in the air as carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. Carbon sequestration is what's going on in the smaller trees located in young forest, just like the area that we looked at. Trees sequester carbon as carbon dioxide during photosynthesis. In very simple terms, trees take carbon dioxide from the air and turn it into the building blocks of cells that eventually become wood, sugars, and finally release oxygen. Trees, along with all plants, do use some of the oxygen that they produce, but they release far more than they need. The faster a tree grows, the more carbon dioxide it pulls in from the atmosphere, and the higher the rates of sequestration. You can see with these examples, growth rates of an old tree, which is here at 15 years, and the trees, in fact, about 140, as opposed to this tree, which is a 15-year-old tree. And I've shown right here 15 years worth of sequestration. As you can see, the younger tree has been doing much more growing over the past 15 years than the old tree. The old tree sequesters carbon at a much slower rate. However, the growth rate of the younger tree indicates a much faster growth and ultimately more carbon removed from the atmosphere or sequestered from the atmosphere. A healthy, resilient, dynamic forest has a balance between both mature and old trees storing carbon and young trees sequestering carbon. This creates a condition that in which the young trees are steadily and consistently pulling lots of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and developing into mature trees that store the carbon. This is a Norway spruce plantation that was established by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s. The objective was to establish a reliable source of timber for a growing country and provide worthwhile and important jobs to people during the Great Depression. However, after it was installed and turned over to the state, it was never properly tended and is in this condition. Some of the issues that are here include various types of root rot, stress associated with overstocking, and cytospora canker. As we talked about before, growing trees sequester carbon, and live trees are the best ways to store carbon on the landscape. Fortunately, there are numerous young trees regenerating in this understory, but if they don't get more light soon, they likely won't make it. Dead material on the ground also stores carbon, but it is decaying and slowly releasing its carbon back into the atmosphere, sort of like a leaky water tank. This plantation is an example of the many forest health challenges that are present within the project area. The most prevalent problems on this forest are overstocking, damage from ice and wind, and disease. Due to the stress associated with overstocking and the repeated physical damage, rot is establishing in wounds rather than the trees being able to section off the damage and limit its spread. This process is called compartmentalization. The ability of a tree to resist pathogens through chemical responses and compartmentalization is an indicator of its health. This can be corrected with scientifically proven forest management techniques, and one of the fastest ways to correct the imbalance is through the establishment of young forest. For example, we would cut all of the Norway spruce here and unhealthy hardwoods. This would end up creating a very large gap with plenty of sunlight and turn it into an area similar to what we looked at before. The primary exception being that we have a bunch of advanced regeneration. But over time, the shrubs, trees, grass, and probably even flowers in some of the bare spots will be shaded out by the larger trees that are moving in. In about 100 years, those larger trees will be ready to cut and start the cycle all over again. Certain trees will be left behind to enhance the diversity and complexity of the area being treated. They'll be allowed to die on their own. In forestry lingo, this is called a legacy tree designation. You can see a legacy tree has already been designated by the green band wrapped around this tree. By leaving these trees as legacy trees, they get really old. They help the site store carbon, provide a good source of seed, and promote diversity and complexity in this smaller area. I hope you enjoyed your visit to the Savoy Mountain State Forest Landscape Restoration Project. We talked about the importance of complexity within natural systems, the need for a dynamic forested landscape, carbon sequestration and storage, and the impacts of climate change. The future projects that are planned for implementation in the restoration area are intended to increase the resiliency of this forest. Forest resiliency is the ability of a forest to absorb disturbances and recover to a point of nearly identical function. As land managers, when we conduct projects that increase forest resilience, we also address all of the concerns that we explored today. Some of those items include managing the forest for more complexity, facilitating the migration of more southerly genotypes, creating the best conditions possible for imperiled species to remain on the landscape, and using forest management techniques that enhance diversity and habitat. If you'd like to learn more about the Savoy Mountain State Forest Landscape Restoration Area, or the individual projects included in the restoration area, please visit the links below or email me. Thank you.